Hey there. So I want to talk about ego and this idea of letting go of ego, of moving beyond ego, and how I think that that's a misnomer when you're on a journey of consciousness or spirituality, that in these bodies we never let go of ego. So before I get into that, I want to just say thank you for being here. I really appreciate you. I know that as of this moment, my channels are pretty small because I've just really started talking about this work in this more public way. So I really appreciate your support. And if you're able to do a like, a subscribe, even a share with a friend, it's super appreciated. It really helps me out. It helps me keep doing this by you sharing that. So I was just making another video for people who are scientists, who are researchers. And those are, I used to be one, and until I quit my tenured faculty job. And then I've gone on a journey that has led me down a path of consciousness. You could call it spirituality. I'm not religious, but spiritual. And this question of ego is one that often comes up in spiritual discussions. I once led a retreat in Sedona, Arizona, and we hired somebody to sort of guide us on like a spiritual hike through the vortex and whatever. And she was a wonderful person, but one thing that she said really, I had this strong reaction when she said it, and it wasn't a positive reaction that I had. She said, you know, our journey here is to let go of all ego. And I understand where that comes from. I mean, I think there's a certain truth to that ultimately, in our journey as human beings, if we consider ourselves on some kind of spiritual journey, there is a letting go of certain aspects of ego that we need to do to raise to higher levels of consciousness or vibration or whatever you want to call that, higher dimensions. So there's a letting go, but it is not a complete letting go of the ego, because I believe that our egos are interfaces between the deeper parts of our consciousness, including, you know, the spiritual part or whatever, that deeper, the quantum consciousness, if you want to call it that, and the interface between that and the outside world, because that is deep and complex, that deeper consciousness. And you can't, it needs an interface. It's sort of like our bodies need skin around them to keep all of the organs contained. The ego is like the skin for our consciousness. And wouldn't it be weird if people walked around saying, you know, started a new trend of like, we got to get rid of our skin because it's not allowing you to expose your underlying organs to the air and let people see them. I mean, that would, you know, frankly, that's kind of disgusting, right? We wouldn't do that. Nobody, I mean, there might be a few people who are crazy enough to do that, but I'm not advising doing this at home, okay? So we don't do that with our skin. We don't say we need to abandon our skin, but we might need to repair our skin or heal our skin, or if there's a problem, get some kind of cosmetic surgery or whatever it is. You know, it's not like we always just leave the skin as is. We might do better nutrition or drink more water if we care about our skin. And you're probably looking at me and saying, oh, have you done anything? And I'm like, yeah, I probably don't do enough in that regard, but whatever. I'm nearing 60, so, you know, all bets are off at that point in life. So I believe it's much better to treat the ego in that same way, that we would be more honest with ourselves if we're not saying, hey, I'm just going to abandon ego and then I'm going to exist in this idealized, perfect spiritual state. I mean, we're in physical bodies. We can't, like, how can we, if we have a physical body, how can we exist in that pure spiritual state of fifth dimension or whatever it is that people say we're supposed to ascend to, unless we have some kind of vehicle that's connected with. And if we have this vehicle, especially of a physical body, it needs an interface to the rest of the physical world. It can't operate in this pure raw form without an interface. Another analogy for this is like computer systems. A computer system, so I studied computer science. I actually have a computer science degree and was a professor related to computer things, so I know a few things, a couple things, one or two, about computers. And computers, like the raw CPU, the raw assembly language, like I've actually done way back in the 80s, like assembly language programming. And that stuff is painful. That's like where you tell the computer to like move this one piece of information from here to here. So you give it a little program instruction to move this, and then move this piece of information from here to there, and then move this piece of information from here to there. Now, if you've done any programming or even working with AI, which is even an upgraded interface, that's really all AI is like a very fancy interface to these computer systems, like the most sophisticated interface that we humans have built to date. Okay, so you compare that assembly language interface, very rudimentary, very time consuming, very difficult, super easy to make mistakes, and you have to know all of this arcane stuff, versus AI, talking to an AI, love it or hate it, it's super easy to use. Like you sit down and say, oh, I'm thinking about such and such. And it's like, how can I help you with that? I mean, that's such a change, right? So we can see that while certainly the hardware has upgraded over those years too, its fundamental ways of operating have not upgraded as much, I would say, as the actual software interfaces have upgraded. Now, some might argue with that, and I don't want to get lost in that, so I'm not going to go off on a sidetrack there. But we clearly, hopefully you can buy in that at least the computer interfaces have really upgraded over the years. I think that's like our ego too. I think as we go on this journey and try to elevate our consciousness to higher levels, whatever system of that you use, whether you talk in dimensions or you talk about David Hawkins' scale of consciousness, or there are so many other systems out there, people on this journey, they're trying to elevate. They're trying to connect to sort of higher energy, higher consciousness. That's like the upgrade of the CPU. But it's pretty hard to have an upgrade of a CPU if we don't also upgrade our ego to work better with that internal upgrade of the CPU. Now, technically, the ego is also an internal upgrade, just maybe not at as deep of a level. So recently I was watching a video by somebody, and I'll try to find it and put it in the description here if I can find it, who was just talking about how this idea of ego flattening, how she was experiencing, and many of us are experiencing in this time, based on what is happening in politics, economy, the world, wars. I didn't mean world wars. Wars out there in the world, hopefully not world wars, that with all of that stuff going on, many of us are experiencing an ego deflation or ego flattening. And so this is why this concept of upgrading the ego versus just trying to abandon ego is so important. Because when we have these times when our ego flattens or deflates, whether it's due to our personal life events, whether it's a health crisis, a relationship crisis, a crisis of faith or confidence, those, or a career crisis, those things can cause ego deflation. They can cause a real, internal, some people even call it the dark night of the soul, but I think much more accurate is the dark night of the ego. The dark night of our old programming no longer being appropriate or suitable or able to deal with whatever the changing conditions of our life are. And I think this environment in our world today is causing this on a more mass scale. It's causing people to say, to look out and say, wow, this is a very different world than I grew up in. The rules seem to have changed like almost overnight. It's kind of crazy out there. I don't know what's coming next. I'm not sure if I can survive or what to do to survive. So your ego just was like, and it feels like the world is ending. And this is what I was talking about on the previous video with scientists, that how it can feel like, if you're a scientist right now, the systems are collapsing around you. So it can feel like the world is ending. And when the ego deflates, that's what it feels like. When you are faced with whatever the crisis is and your ego deflates, again, it just feels, it's very anxiety provoking. It can feel literally like the end of the world. And I'll be honest, I have felt like that some over the last few months, some. But fortunately, like, I have this tool, and that's why I'm sharing it with you, this tool or this perspective that, what our job is, or what our opportunity, I shouldn't say job. Job says somebody is prescribing something to us. It's more like what our opportunity is in those times when our ego is deflating, when the old ways of your ego operation are not working for you anymore. It is the best opportunity for an upgrade. You can upgrade the ego at any time by examining your old beliefs and then deciding, some of those aren't working for me. Some of that programming that I picked up, it's not so great. I'm going to try to upgrade it. And lots of people have done that through time. But it rarely, there's a lot of resistance, because it's not only that you need to upgrade your ego, but then the outside world sometimes pushes back, because people who know you and the systems that you operate in, they're like, no, we don't want an upgraded version of you. We want the old you. We want the person that we hired, or that we fell in love with, or that we got in this relationship with, or whatever it is. And so you can get a lot of pushback from upgrading and changing. People still do it, and I've worked on it over the years. But even that sometimes has been limited. And really, my times when I've gotten the biggest opportunities and taken them for upgrading have been times of crisis. So for me, it was after I left my faculty job years ago, my tenured faculty job, then health crisis 4 or 5 years ago, and then more recently, just this whole crisis around us, and just really a profound feeling like what I was doing before in my business and my life, that's not really going to work in this environment anymore. And again, so it's like a series of crises, and with each of these, I have come out the other side after times of anxiety and panic as that ego deflates, where I'm able to reinflate it, but in a new form, in a new and better form, in an ego 2.0 form or ego 3.0 form. With all the crises I've faced and come through, I'm probably on ego like 5.0 or something at this point. But this has been a super important concept for me. And I wish we talked about this more, rather than just like, let's abandon ego. Well, then what do you do? How does that help you in a crisis? Like, okay, so you're just supposed to sit there and meditate in your crisis, like your career is potentially ending or whatever, or maybe you're the target of like attacks by the secret police, I'll just put it as. And you're supposed to sit around meditating until your ego goes away, and then none of it matters to you. I mean, that hurts my head. Like, that's not real world stuff. We live in a real world. We're in physical bodies. We're not going to do that. So instead, though, if you're like, okay, this stuff is really, it's really challenging, and it feels like the world is ending. But the question that you can ask in that time is like, well, what beliefs, what programming in my ego that I carried up to this point are no longer working for me, especially that are now really apparent to me during this crisis. Now, some people call this shadow work, and that is one word for it. I think that sometimes gets into this whole dark versus light, and are you getting sucked into the dark and whatever. Okay, I mean, that works for some people, and sometimes that language even works for me. But as somebody who grew up in computer science and science, I like to look at it functionally. And functionally, I would say it's bad programming. Like, that computer program is glitching, and maybe you cobbled it together enough so that it worked in that environment, but then things change and it caused a stress test on that very fragile code that you had. And because of the stress on that fragile code, now all the bugs are showing up, and the whole thing is just crashing, and your computer system really doesn't work very much anymore. And you just kind of gotta start over. Or what some people more often do, because our society, we don't talk about this kind of stuff in any kind of functional way, is some people will, yes, pursue shadow clearing work and energy healing and things like that. And again, that's fine for people for whom that works. That can be a way to upgrade. But another way to upgrade is to understand what is the broken stuff. And you don't need to go too deeply into that. I'm not saying to spend years examining the brokenness. That's not going to get you anywhere. But to understand what's broken just enough that you can say, okay, yeah, those things really don't work for me anymore. And I really do need an upgrade so that I can function better in this new environment. So there are symptoms, like the symptom of staying in that broken ego is, when you're just trying to patch that code that's clearly no longer working. It's like crashing, panic attacks, or feeling or just avoidance, even like getting into drinking, or just watching TV constantly, or whatever people do for avoidance these days. I'm probably out of date because I kind of, live a little bit like a hermit, not totally. I talk to a lot of people, but there's avoidance, there's trying to just patch. So a patch would be, an example of that would be if you're in a career that seems to be sort of crumbling, and things around are crumbling, saying, well, I just need to work harder. I just need to work harder. Hard work got me to where I am. And so it's safe, this is old ego programming. It's safe when I work harder, I am more safe. And so I'm just going to even work harder. But harder work in a crumbling system is not going to actually really help you. It might just make you ill, make you sick, which is then another thing to deal with along with the crumbling system around you. That's not going to help. In fact, I think now, at this time, self-care is more necessary than ever. Taking care of ourselves. That's probably a whole other video. So let me put that aside for now. So it is an opportunity, if you don't go into one of these kind of reflexive modes of covering it up or patching it or just trying quick fixes. But if you actually say, yeah, this old ego, this old program really isn't working anymore. It really is time for sort of a forced upgrade. And I will take that opportunity to examine the bad programming and decide, what do I want as better programming? And a few hints, because I don't want to make this too long, but a few hints towards what I call Ego 2.0. The first important upgrade is to move out of competition and into cooperation, to move out of scarcity thinking. And that doesn't mean just money scarcity, although that's one of them, but it could be time scarcity, perceptions of resource scarcity, of attention scarcity, recognition scarcity. If we look around at certain leaders today, many leaders today, they're operating very firmly from the scarcity of all those things, and they keep trying to get more and more and more of all of that to make themselves feel good, to make up for internal deficiencies in their programming, and it just never makes up for it. They just want more and more and more. So moving from that to a sense of abundance, a sense that there's enough for all, especially if we work cooperatively to create it. A sense of vision, or at least intention of where we want to go with our lives, rather than just reactively bouncing around according to whatever our job says or our boss says or whatever the economic circumstances are. a sense of more purpose and intention in Ego 2.0. So those are just a few of the upgrades. I probably should make a whole other video later more about Ego 2.0 and even 3.0 and what I see those as being. But that should get you started. So the key point I really want to convey here is that if it feels like the world is sort of falling apart and that creates anxiety, that creates anger, frustration for you, this is your opportunity. This is your opportunity to upgrade old, faulty, broken software. It's a forced opportunity. We don't choose this because this process can be painful, but it's less painful than trying to put your head in the sand, patch things up, and operate for just a little bit longer until, oh, it's going to go back to normal. No, it's not. No, like even if we fix some of the current political crises, there's so much out there. National debt, ecology, climate change. I mean, you name it. I heard it described as the polycrisis once. And I'm a reformed gloom and doomer. I had a lot of Ego 1.0 based gloom and doom, like everything's going to end and be horrible. And Mad Max type scenarios were often running in my head because I grew up watching that film, like even when I was younger. And I no longer buy into that, except in my darkest moments. I occasionally still have dark moments where I can get back in that mode. But this Ego 2.0 says, yeah, there may be some really challenging things. And, I and we together can find ways, creative ways to face these things, to address these problems and overcome these problems. So it's fundamentally more optimistic, and it's a better place to be. It feels better, and even if it's totally lying to itself to be at all optimistic in today's age, well, if you only had 3 days left on the planet, would you rather live those 3 days in dark cynicism and fear, curled up in bed watching like end of world movies or whatever? Or would you rather spend those 3 days left on Earth doing the best that you can, being the best person you can be, being loving, being inspirational, being kind, helping people? When I ask myself that question, the answer is very clear. What's your answer? I'd love to see your answer in the comments. So I'll wrap up there. Thank you for being here. Again, I really appreciate you. And if you can subscribe, really helps me out, keeps me going. And I'll be back with another video. See you later. It's not the end of the world. Not yet anyway.